Hello and welcome to Fascinated by Fungi Live. Today we have the privilege of speaking with author Eugenia Bone. She is a epic cookbook author and has also authored a book on mushrooms and the human gut microbiome. She is one of my inspirations and why I got into mushrooms, and I think she has followed sort of a similar path in being interested in food and the culinary aspects of mushrooms first, and then getting into the deeper aspects of mycoculture. And her book, Mycophilia, really gave me insights into just the incredible diversity of American mycoculture and all the different people and aspects that it covered. And so I'm really excited to chat with her in real time and get to kind of nerd out on food and some of the things that she's done. Her cookbook, Well Preserved, has been nominated for a James Beard Award. So she's really high echelon food people and has done amazing writing for New York Times and all sorts of food magazines and a bunch of publications. So I'm going to see if I can get her on the call here, and we will get going. So just one second. Per usual, the way we're going to do this is Eugenia and I are going to go back and forth and mostly just have comments you want to pop in the section down below. Go for it. I'll see if I can spin them into conversation. Hello, Eugenia. How you doing?
Hi, Gordon.
Hey.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us. I was just trying to tell people about the amazing work that you've done in terms of writing about mushrooms, especially from a culinary aspect, and sort of relating that. I think you and I entered into an interest in mushrooms because we could eat them, because it was something tasty. And I think a lot of people can relate to that, because there's some people who just fear mushrooms and don't like the flavor of them, but a lot of people are interested in mushrooms, at least because they've eaten them and enjoyed them as food, which is a good starting point if you are currently not so sure about mushrooms, right? Because you can eat them and they're good.
Yeah, glutton first, follow your gluttony for sure, and then follow after that the wormhole of why it tastes good and where to find them and all the things involved in their acquisition.
Yes, totally. And I mean, you came into mushrooms, I guess, by writing cookbooks and exploring mushroom recipes and saying, I like it. It's not just a button mushroom. There's so many more kinds of mushrooms out there that if you don't like mushrooms, you've probably only ever tried one species. So why not diversify a little bit, right?
Yeah, I mean, for me, actually, I came into, I've been passionate about wild foods for most of my life. And the reason why, I like to eat in general. I'm a voracious eater of all. There's not anything I don't like, really. Well, I don't really like melon, which is a weird thing. I think there might be a genetic aspect to that. But
is that cucumber too, or just sweet melons? No,
just sweet melons. But but I've always been a wild food enthusiast, and part of that is because I love to hunt. I totally get off on the rush of hunting. I've done, I've hunted boar and I've hunted birds, but my favorite thing to do is the quiet hunt. So that's hunting mushrooms, hunting for, oysters, stuff that doesn't move, but camouflages. And when I have that moment of discovery, I get very turned on, and it's very closely aligned with the joys of appetite for me. Yeah. So, and I think that must be some kind, I'm like tapped into my inner Neanderthal or whatever, but I'm really tapped into that and it turns me on. So I got into mushrooms because I really got turned on to hunting mushrooms. And then then the wild food flavors were something that
right, because you can't recapitulate that any other way. There's this food that's out there that's cryptic, it's hidden, it's ephemeral because it's only there sometimes and only after particular conditions, and you have to go out, spot it, and then you get to eat this thing that you can't purchase in a store. You can't pay money for this experience. It's only something that you can go get, which is really special.
Something like being not dead too long. I know that sounds kind of creepy. I've actually never said this before publicly, but it's so true. When I eat an oyster that I've collected directly from the ocean on the beach, it's the temperature of the sea. It's all the more delicious because it's closer to its own identity. It's not, sort of fading away in terms of its enzymes and whatever else is lending a flavor to that thing. And I think the same is true of mushrooms. When you eat a really fresh mushroom you've picked in the woods, not necessarily raw, right? But it's really the flavor experience is more complex and more profound. So it's super fun.
And there's something to be said for like the idea of terroir, the essence of place, and that is distilled down into that oyster or that oyster mushroom, either way. But when you're eating it at the time of having picked it, you still have the experience of being in that habitat. And I know that I would get this whenever I went sailing for like a long day. I'd cover scuba diving or something, like I really want seafood. I've been underwater all day. Now I just want to eat the fish that I've been looking at. And if I'm in the woods all day, I'm like, man, I really want to eat the mushrooms that I've been finding, because that reminds me of where I've been, being in the experience and smelling and touching and feeling. That whole tactile and just experience thing that happens gets translated through your mouth into your brain and creates those amazing smell and taste flavor memories that stick with you for a lifetime sometimes. So I agree. I mean, I think also when your confidence level about the food quality is really high, it's sort of liberating too. And that's something that mushroom hunters deal with all the time. How confident am I about eating this mushroom? But if you're 100% confident, oh my God, it's a fantastic experience. Between the high of hunting and then the kind of carnal satisfaction of eating, it's altogether a very nice way to spend the weekend. Yeah, definitely. And it's an incredible boon to, I think, mental health for people to like get out and search, and like seeing people in their 60s get excited like 5-year-olds when they find a particular kind of mushroom that they've been excited about, just like makes me so happy inside, because it's something that I think mushrooms have this incredible ability to engage everybody from all these different demographics. It's not about your social economic background or your age, your gender, or anything. You can go out in the woods and just be like, what is this crazy red thing? And
I mean, that's
so
the
exciting.
wonderful thing about the clubs, the mycological societies that are all over the country. I mean, when I first joined the New York Mycological Society many years ago, it was, you'd be hunting in the woods with somebody and they could be a financier, like a banker, like somebody who's financing the Verrazano Bridge, or they could be a plumber.
Lost you.
Okay. So there's so anyway,
so many different people.
The careers that that people leave behind. People, I think, leave their careers in the car when they go to hunt in the woods.
Yes, definitely. And that's a really special thing, because there's not too many other places in life where people aren't using their status or somehow lording their position over other people. But when you get into the woods, everybody is on the same equal footing of on the ground looking for mushrooms. No one's being self-conscious about diving under a bush, because there might be a mushroom under there and you don't want to miss it, right?
Yeah, I know. It's pretty hilarious. I mean, also there's all this etiquette to mushroom hunting that is kind of good to be mindful of if you're into mushroom hunting. For example, if you see somebody collecting under a tree, you don't go over there and start collecting from their patch as well. Right. So, it's a little bit of it's a very individualistic or very, personal experience to get out in the woods, even in a collective. So the mushroom clubs go out to foray, and you've got all these different types of people with all of these different interests at home. But everybody's into gathering mushrooms, and yet once you're in the woods, you're kind of each in your own bubble. You're each looking for your own patch,
right.
And having your own personal experience, which is lovely. It can feel like
a team sport, but like really everyone is kind of on their own personal journey to like put what's in their basket. And I know from your book, you spoke about when you first went out and you were sort of worried. You're like, are people going to ask me for my mushrooms? Do I ask other people? And you realize pretty quickly, like, everybody picks their own, they're in their own basket. And like, maybe there's a little bit of bartering or something if somebody wants a little bit of that for something, a bit of this, but like for the most part, what's in your basket is yours and no one's going to come after you for it. And that's, so you were just part of the New York Mycological Society. You were president of that for some period of time,
for about
right?
5 years. Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
I was a member for a long time. And then Yeah, and then it was really an easy job, and it was great getting to know everybody. I mean, the hardest thing about, at least in New York City, was finding spaces for our banquets, finding restaurants that would say, well, we're only serving mushrooms. You can't, serve anything else. But it was a wonderful job. And just the other day, I did a talk for, the clubs are now doing consortium talks where instead of each club bringing in their own speaker, more and more clubs are joining together as a consortium and taking it and taking advantage of the Zoom thing to be able to hear these speakers that they might not otherwise be able to, fly in or whatever. And in the beginning, before too many people were aboard, I saw all these members from the New York Mycological Society, and it was just fantastic. I hadn't seen them, because of COVID for a long time, so we're all like this. Oh, hi, how are you? God, you've gotten grayer. Oh, your hair is long, your beard. So it was a wonderful, the camaraderie of these sort of groups are great. It's a learning camaraderie. I would recommend to your viewers, your listeners, that they look into local mycological societies. It's a great way to enhance your knowledge and find new patches,
Well, yeah, you can learn about new mushrooms, but more than anything, what I've gained out of joining a mycological society is just that community and having people that I can go to and talk about mushrooms and not have them be like, oh, Gordon, I've heard, shut up about mushrooms already. Yeah. It's like other people who are just as nerdy, if not more nerdy than me. Yeah. And that's because I think Soma is I know Soma is my local club because I'm a board member on Soma, but you've been to Soma camp before, I think, right?
Numerous times.
It's a fun one. We're looking forward to having one again this year.
Oh my God, it's so much fun. It's like Soma. I remember I did a talk once there, and everybody at the table was saying, "Oh yeah, we always get the speakers drunk before they go up." It's like, oh great,
I'm a little tipsy.
It's also the best food of all the forays. It's like Soma camp. Wow.
I think we can thank Julie for that because I know she's cooked for years at that one, and I got to my last Soma camp. I got a chance to work in the kitchen with Julie, which was a great experience because not only is she an amazing chef, but she's a very good kitchen manager. And despite that things were like going off in all sorts of directions, she gently brought everything back on course without yelling at any. There was no Gordon Ramsay moments, and I was just like, Julie, I'm so impressed by your ability to handle massive mess ups and not break a sweat at all and just keep moving, because that's what you got to do in the kitchen. So
that's cool. Right. Julie Schreiber's a good organizer. She also has that she does the Wild About Mushrooms program for foraying, and I've been on some of those forays looking for spring boletes, and it's super fun. Highly recommend.
I think Jerry and I are gonna go and do one with her in May sometime. So I'm really excited for this spring season because our winter season was kind of crappy. I was did not get an appreciable number of chanterelles or hedgies or black trumpets compared to some years. So I'm very much looking forward to morels and spring porcini. That should be a good one.
For our photo shoots for the Fantastic Fungi Community Cookbook, we got beautiful mushrooms from the West Coast through Far West Fungi. Yeah. And they were glorious. We got Boletus edulis, we got beautiful black trumpets, big black trumpets, which were lovely. Lovely to photograph. Hedgehogs, the works, chanterelles, your big California chanterelles. Ours in New York are like
it's in minutes. I think because I'm East Coast, so I go hunting on the East Coast in summer sometimes, and I know I've found decent sized golden ones, but also there's all the tiny little orangey Craterellus ignicolors or something like that. I assume you have something similar in New York, and most of those are just minuscule. And you're like, I could pick 100 of these. There's still going to be a single bite on a piece of toast. So
that's it. That they're like graylings, also a very tiny mushroom that you find a patch of them and you just say, okay, I'm gonna lay down. That's a little bit what hunting, the Orpheocordyceps sinensis is like, because I've gone to Tibet to do that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Cool. It was a wild and woolly trip, and so to find those mushrooms, everybody is like, here, I'm lying on my bed. You lie down, and you kind of do. Here we go. You have to lie on your side, and you're just looking for these things that look like little tiny sticks, among the grass. It's really you have to be super, super relaxed. If
Literally
you're
looking for
anxious
a
to
needle
find
in a
mushrooms,
haystack
you're
kind of thing.
screwed.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's that's a part of the joy too. Sometimes that's just like a matter of harvesting. You're going in and you're just collecting as much as you can. So what? That's fun too. I'm into it.
So, so you mentioned Far West, and I have to say, like, because I haven't been finding a bunch of mushrooms, I've been going to the farmers market and buying my mushrooms from Far West, so I'm very thankful to them. But you got some of those mushrooms to work on the Fantastic Fungi Cookbook, which
Yeah,
is something that came out as a Fantastic Fungi movie, was something that, Louis and Paul and you and I don't know, there's a bunch of really amazing people in that movie. And I think that movie did a great job of opening up the world to more mycology. Because I think,
yeah,
we've had multiple milestones from, David Aurora's books, Paul Stamets' books, to Paul Stamets' TED Talks and some of the other things he's done. And that movie busted the doors wide open on people's
yeah,
interest in fungi. And because of the visual aspect of it, I think was super engaging. And then,
yeah,
the fact that they stacked it with people like you, like really legitimate authors and scientists and people that are super smart. And out of that has come community and this amazing cookbook that you've been putting together. Do you want to talk a little bit about what that cookbook has meant versus some of the other ones that you've sort of authored on your own, and now you're like the grand arbiter of trying to collect all these things and make sure the recipes work?
yeah. So, so Louis and I, met a long time ago, and we talked about mushrooms and microbes and all kinds of things together for many years. And then he made his movie, and I have a cameo in it. Then, about I guess it was in June, this past June, he said, I want to do a cookbook. I want to do a mushroom cookbook with you.
You were the
And
right person to ask, clearly.
yeah, he had a relationship, and mushroom cookery is something that I put some energy into doing and learning about. And he and so he said, like, I want you to do this mushroom cookbook. And I thought, you know ugh, who really, there's lots of fantastic mushroom cookbooks out there. Who really needs a like Eugenia Bone mushroom cookbook? Not Eugenia Bone, frankly. So I kind of thought about it for a while, and then I realized that one of my favorite types of cookbooks are these community cookbooks. We do them in the
Mm.
various mushroom clubs.
Hmm.
There's a mushroom club will put together mushroom recipes out of their club membership, and you see that with garden clubs, all kinds of civic, hobby, and social organizations. And I thought, wow, if we did a community cookbook, that would be so sort of on brand. And I hate to sound like a marketing person. I know that, but not that I hate marketing people. Oh my God, please don't write me about that. It's, that it's just that I don't mean to sound that, like we're just trying to make money or something. It was really, trying to be true to what Louis' idea is,
Mm.
and his brand, or his
Hmm.
basic idea is that mycelium connects, that mycelium is a metaphor for connecting people to each other, and that as a collective we are more effective working as a group than singularly, right?
Well, I mean, in the forest, the trees will all grow much higher if they're all connected by mycelium, and there's underlying community for each individual pillar, and that's a great metaphor for how we as human beings function in the world, and especially
Oh
how
yeah,
chefs
how we
learn
could,
from
yeah.
each other. Chefs in isolation will never be as creative as when they watch other people work too. So having that back and forth is so important.
Yeah. So anyway, I thought, wow, a community cookbook is really, sort of true to what Louis is trying to do. And so I suggest, but where are you going to get the recipes? So I said, listen, we don't know if it would work. So let's put together a website, and that would be something that people can upload their recipes to, and it's in and of itself um, a unique place, for mushroom sharing, mushroom recipe sharing. And then in time, if we see that there's a lot of recipes and a lot of recipes that we could publish, well, let's go for it. And that's exactly what happened. People started loading in their recipes, and at first I was really worried. I was
Eugenia froze for 1 second, so we'll just wait till she loads back here. I think it's really amazing how Eugenia and Louis have generated this community.
Like 2 recipes a day.
Sorry, I lost you there for 1 second, but you were talking about
you
recipe testing and just what it was to assemble the book, I guess.
Yeah. So what we're doing at this point is I'm testing the recipes that are put up on the website. They live on the website, so they're all there.
Okay. So it's a living book as much as it is going to be a actual in print thing too, right?
It's a great way to put it. And 100%, the website is ongoing. We just make sure that people don't put up a recipe for something that can make you sick, like a morel carpaccio, for example. And
yes.
then, and then, so that continues, and I'm hoping people will continue to put their recipes up. I know I will. But the book is a collection from the website, and that collection is, now we have a deal, and we are planning to publish. So, and we have one of your recipes in it, which is how we kind of met. Is that you put up that recipe for matsutake gohan, and I tested it, and I was like, that's damn good.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a huge thrill to see your email pop in my inbox, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. So so I guess in the sense of entering into mushrooms from edibility and food, that was both of us came in from entry point, and that expanded into a full overview and interest, for me at least, in mycoculture. And I think that's the same path your book Mycophilia takes a little bit, is realizing that food is what motivates you, but that there's such a broader culture of mushrooms and the community aspect we mentioned, but then so many different personalities and little clubs around the country, and aspects of health and other things related to sort of a broader sense of mycoculture and this love of mushrooms. But that is severely contrasted in society by this fear of mushrooms, this mycophobia that seems to be kind of pervasive. And I feel like almost anywhere you go that I say, I like mushrooms, someone inevitably is like, I hate mushrooms. And that's the end of their conversation about it. I'm like, well, can we talk about why you hate mushrooms, or where is this fear coming from? Do you have any sense of like the origin of American mycophobia? Because not all countries are like this. Many countries in the world love mushrooms, and there is no fear. So what happened to our country?
Wait until you get into bacteria, which I know you're into. Everybody hates bacteria.
Yes.
Everybody's scared of bacteria. So yeah, I mean, it's there. For one of the things that I have noticed is that the mycophobia is, tends to be more prevalent in certain cultures. The English have a tradition of mycophobia, and we sort of inherited that here in the United States. Whereas Eastern Europe and Europe, no such thing. They're passionate about mushrooms in places where there are not a lot of mushrooms growing, in very, places that are very dry and hot. There isn't much of a mycoculture at all, because it's not really on certain, areas radar. But the fears, have the English and American kind of based fears have a lot to do with, I think, 2 things. One is a legitimate concern for misidentification. And the consumption of poisonous mushrooms, and but that's in a way kind of silly, because there's poisonous berries too, but we don't freak out, about all.
In fact, there's far more poisonous plants than mushrooms, and like the whole idea of, I mean, people always, like, the number one question I get when people see the videos I make are like, can you touch mushrooms safely? And I'm like, yeah.
I noticed you're like, that's your like thing now. It's really great. I love it. I listen to them every day.
It's kind of on the edge of like disturbing and weird, and I feel weird making them, but people seem to love it. So I do feel a little weird.
That's okay. I feel a little weird listening, if that makes you feel better. I think the other thing, Gordon, that is really significant is something that's almost, it's a very ephemeral thing, but it's this fact that fungi are involved in the cycle of decomposition. That's some species, the saprobes.
Yeah.
And, death and the returning to earth and all that, scary.
Mm-hmm.
It's affiliated with, our own ideas of death and disease. And it's a shame that the whole cycle of life isn't sort of built into our cultural appreciation as much as, some cultures like Indigenous Americans, right? They
Mm-hmm.
have a very strong sense of the cycle of life,
Mm-hmm.
nature. But barring that, or if we have fantasies or headsets that think death is something to be feared and is horrible and scary, all of which I suppose it is, but it's not, and so. And so the mushroom, I think, becomes something of a totem for stuff that we're scared about.
Yeah, I can see that.
But that's also something you can't really analyze. But if you talk to people, go out into like Louis went to the Kennett Square Mushroom Festival and was asking around, what do you think of mushrooms? And, people were saying, well, until I tasted them, I was thinking, oh, they're kind of gross and, they're slimy and they rot things, and all those implications that are negative and maybe shouldn't be uh, presented as negative. And I think people are maybe their eyes are opening and seeing that the decomposers are also the resurrectors of life.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just as a general look at our society, we've uncoupled food and death. And I think they're kind of inseparable to some degree, because if you harvest a plant, you kill it. If you kill an animal to get meat, you kill it. And we have, in the era of nicely packed, vacuum sealed chicken breasts and pork chops and stuff like that, the consumption of meat and food has no relation to the death and the blood and the stinking animal parts and all that stuff. And mushrooms, I think, are this weird, like you mentioned, kind of an in-between where it reminds people that there is death involved in the food that they're eating. And from a sense of like saprobic wood decay fungi, I don't feel that, but I think because there's that ephemeral sort of there and gone nature of them, people associate that a little bit with that some of that unsureness of fear and just not closing the loop between death and food and life. And that, definitely plays into the mycophobia. I think too, just in society, the lack of our education about mushrooms and lack of a healthy discussion around mushrooms as food, and just, I think the only thing that people in society really seem to use mushrooms as a talking point for now is psychedelics, which is fine. And I've seen multiple comments down in the things go by where people talk about them, and I have loved psychedelics. They're great, and psychedelic mushrooms are fine. But like, trying to get people to advance the discussion beyond that and recognize that like there's a way to like mushrooms that's not involved in a controlled substance, and getting people to think about just how to enjoy a mushroom as a mushroom. And I talk about this with other people, but like viewing the world not through your human eyes, but through the eyes of a fungus. How much could we gain from like taking on the world and viewing it from the view of mycelium, which is a really difficult headspace to put yourself into, because we don't relate to mycelium. We as human beings are one, we are singular, and mycelium is plurality, all through the soil, interconnected with different types of fungus and bacteria and all sorts of, is an interconnected, crazy underground highway of things all mishmashed together. And we as humans can't understand that. And even the sense that like mushrooms come up sort of as, like you said, the fruit or the flower of the mycelium below doesn't sit well with people. They're like, I want something to be there or not be there. And you're like, well, mushrooms aren't that. Mushrooms won't follow your expectations or your projections, your human desire for a mushroom to have purpose or function or, serve some role in the world. Mushrooms are just mushrooms, and they do what they do. And I love that you're out educating people, because I think you're one of the most important voices we have for mycology and advancing the idea that mushrooms should be normalized and accepted and loved because the way that they are in other cultures. And it's so strange to me that we're so anti
we're
this
catching
otherness.
up.
We are.
Yeah, we're doing great. So many people are into mushrooms these days. It's just fantastic. I mean, one of the things that, when I talk to like garden groups, which I love to, because just the notion of the role of the positives. I mean, gardeners know the negative role of fungi, because most plant pathogens are fungus.
Yeah, rusts and molds and random things that attack plants.
Yeah, but many gardeners are not aware of the beneficial roles that fungi play in nature, and so one of the in their gardens. And one of the things that I love to kind of remember for myself, and also for when I'm talking with gardeners, is that fungi are like the verbs in plant life. They um, they kill plants as pathogens.
Mm-hmm.
They rot plants as saprobes. They defend plants as endophytes in seeds, and they nurture plants as mycorrhizae, which provide nutrition to plants, nutrition that plants need but don't make themselves as a result of photosynthesis. The plant grows, and then fungus kills the plant, and then it rots the plant, and then it helps the seedling grow, and then it kills the plant. So the fungus is like the verbs in a plant life. It's the action between the different stages of the plant life. And I think that's a really, it's a very, kind of takes away it adds to the mystery of mycology in some ways, but it takes away that alien quality that the kingdom fungi seems to have to so many people who are when they're first introduced to it.
Yeah, and I think people forget that plants have never existed without fungi. Like the whole colonization of land, of plants coming to land, was enabled by fungi, because plants, there was, pre the colonization of land, there was just rocks. It looked like the surface of Mars, and it was the combination of fungi. Yeah, exactly. The combination of fungi being able to like sneak down and, the way they used to do like rock separations in quarries. I'm from New England, and you walk around these old quarries, and they drill down a hole, and they just stick a big stick of wood down it, and then they'd get it wet, and it would crack the huge rock. And this was like, you didn't need dynamite, you just needed water. And that's the same thing that fungi do, is they, with their little mycelial threads, they grow into rocks, and then they swell with water, and the rock goes and cracks. And that's how soils are generated. And that's, plants and fungi have always been connected in that way. And I love that, you're talking about this alien idea, and people always ascribe fungi to being otherworldly and off planet. You're like, no, this is all life on our planet. So you can look at these evolutionary lineages as they've evolved over time. And there's been a few points where like fungal diversity exploded as a result of like environmental conditions. I think after one of the big asteroid things, there was tons of dead organic material. What happened? Well, there's a huge bloom in fungi diversity, which, makes a lot of sense. So all that kind of stuff, you look into the history of it, and you look at the way that plants and fungi have always interacted, it's super, super fascinating. But
well, there's kind of these themes in nature, and they're so kind of comforting and glorious when you learn about them in whatever biology class or from books. But like the notion that that the role fungi play in the life of plants is very similar to the role bacteria play in our lives. They help us from when we're a little fetus all the way, when we're in the womb all the way through, and then they help decompose us at the end. So, you sort of carry your entire, your sort of operating system that's been shopped out to these other organisms with you throughout your life, and plants do the same with fungi. So to me, it's a gloriously complex thing, and it gives me more it gives me more faith in the future when I think of how much there is that when I think of how complex our world is, and how much there is that we can still learn about it.
There is, and
the promise is endless.
So something interesting, in the process of writing Mycophilia, you clearly got introduced to the mycology community and became much more vested in different aspects of community by visiting festivals and meeting people and becoming part of clubs. How did that contrast with you going to write your microbia book, where you were then trying to sort of take what you'd done with mushrooms and starting to look at bacteria and microbiomes and the more sort of, even more microbiology focused on this invisible world that's on our skin, in our guts, all over the place, all the time, because fungi and bacteria are ubiquitous, but they're invisible to us with the naked eye. So there's again that fear of the otherness, but like it's everywhere. So it's so important.
Yeah. Well, with mycophilia and with the mycology community, the mycological world, the benefit of it was that I was in the company of people who were just, pleasure seekers with a scientific bent. There's people who love to eat mushrooms and drink wine and tromp around in the woods. So there was an endless supply of kind of joyous moments. Whereas with microbia, I had such a steep learning curve because I was one of these people that didn't think I had the gene for science, and so I always avoided biology studies in college and so on. I was an English major. I'm a writer first and foremost, but I got very, very excited when I started to conceive of the complexity of any single entity. So the complexity of our bodies, the complexity of a particular ecosystem, the complexity of on a planetary level. I mean, it was it became something that I wanted to learn more about. I wanted to get a grip on it, something that was probably pretty impossible to do. Ecologists maybe have the best kind of way into to grasping these interrelations, the symbiotic relationships that characterize our life on our planet. But I was really in over my head trying to understand this material. Mycology was a little simpler for me than bacteriology, so I had to go back to school to get some basic biology. And it was like everybody in there was the age of my kids. And I felt like, wow, I have wasted a shitload of time, but here I am, and I'm studying really hard, and I'm trying to navigate the college experience again, but it did provide the basics I needed to at least be able to read papers on the subject and to draw some elemental conclusions. And that was enough to be able to write a book that sort of said that described the basic role of bacteria in different aspects of life on Earth. It's from our origins, our origins of our mitochondria. The part of our cell that uses oxygen to turn our food into energy to make us go is a bacterium.
That we co-opted, that one cell ate another one. I was like, okay, you're going to be my little power factory, and I'm going to ensure that you replicate every time, even though you have your own distinct genome.
And that's us. That's us. Your mitochondria breaks open in your bloodstream, and your immune system will attack it. The alien bacteria that it is. So that kind of thing it just blows me mind. And that's when I was saying earlier, I get this incredible sort of surge of positivity and faith in the future, because the world we're standing in is just so complex. There's so much incredibly great, amazing reality around us that I'm not blinded so much by the negative stuff that we humans do to each other.
Yeah, I guess that's my bastion of hope, is that if we can get people to take off the blinders, that we're so focused on social issues or other things, and be like, hey, look, there's this natural world out there. There's mushrooms, there's bacteria, there's so many fantastic things with this incredible complexity. And again, I think you coming from a non-science background is actually very effective for you being a science communicator, because that's exactly, so many scientists learn the science but never really learn how to talk about it to non-scientists. And it's important to be able to do that, because if you can't talk about your science, if you can't explain it to a lay person or somebody who doesn't have a scientific background, what are you really doing it for? Because you're trying to engage the world,
People know, because that's me. People with your education, Gordon, you'd be surprised how little most of us know. And it's really, it's inhibiting. And it's really great to have your eyes opened a little bit to the natural world. And the bottom line is there's salvation in nature, personal, spiritual,
Absolutely.
and, actual.
All those things. So, I mean, one of the things I think is kind of interesting, because we in this country are just starting to wake up to the importance of our own personal microbiome. And what that means is the composition of microbes on your skin, in your gut. And those are, the two places we think about them primarily, but those can have massive effects on health. And it's not just your microbiome composition, it's what you feed your microbiome or how you tend your microbiome, just like you would at a garden, right? And in a garden, if you got a couple of weeds, you don't just scorch the earth. You go out and you weed your garden, right? You don't just take a flamethrower to the whole thing. And that's, I think, what people are sort of missing with the idea of our microbiomes, is people are like, oh, I have bad bacteria, I must take antibiotics. You're like, well, maybe instead of bad bacteria, you should focus on more good bacteria and how to feed those good bacteria so that your weeds won't really be an issue if you have a strong enough overcrop. There's always going to be weeds there in a garden. And feeding a bunch of chemical pesticides or taking a flamethrower to it is not an effective way to get rid of those weeds, because those weeds will just come back. And if there's not something better there to outcompete them, there'll be more weeds than there were before. And that's like I don't know if it's a perfect analogy, but it's a similar analogy to what happens in our gut microbiota when we take an antibiotic, or when we massively shift the food that we're feeding ourselves. Because we as humans are walking, breathing bioreactors. We have more bacterial cells in our body than we do eukaryotic mammalian cells. And so what we eat really matters. And that was something that I took away from Mycophilia, was your chapter on mushroom nutrition, specifically thinking about polysaccharides. And when we say polysaccharides, most people think sugar or something like that. But like, complex polysaccharides are basically not food that we get, it's food that bacteria get. And so they're serving as
prebiotics.
Prebiotics, exactly.
Prebiotics is what you feed bacteria. Probiotics is live bacteria that you introduce. I think that in a way, what was really helpful to me when I was learning this stuff is that there's no good bacteria or bad bacteria. It's really more a matter of population ratios. So you can have too many of a particular bacteria, and it's when those population ratios change or get out of whack that you can develop illness. So that, first of all, taking like the morality out, good guy, bad guy, was great. That was liberating for me. Because then I was like, well, what I really want to try to develop in and on my skin and so on is a complex ecosystem where there's not a lot of where all the rooms in the hotel, like on my skin or in my gut, are filled with a complex and balanced population, ratio of populations, different bacterial populations. And it's only when I do something like take antibiotics that I clear out some rooms in the hotel, and whoever is in there that is resistant to that antibiotic for some reason, like say the bacteria that causes C. diff, which has got a little sort of shell form that it can go into to protect itself from antibiotics and other things. Well, then it's like, wow, look at all this room in the hotel. It's like, getting on a flight and all of a sudden you've got the whole row to lay down on, So that's exactly what the bacteria does. And it can proliferate. And then before you know it, you've got diarrhea for the next 3 months. So, So anyway, it's really like ecology.
It is.
Ecology. That is the real takeaway for me when I was reading a lot about bacteria and the human gut ecosystem.
Well, to what my garden analogy is, like, a weed is only a weed when it's where you don't want it to be. And that's the same sense that, like, the morality of good or bad is really just dependent on, like, context and ratio in some ways. And like, my partner spends her days out in the vineyard
finding all these cool plants, and in the vineyard they're like, oh, these are weeds, these are, you know. And she's like, well, this is also cover crop, and it's, do you want a diverse microbiome? Do you want diversity in your ecology, in your landscape, whether that's in your gut or out in the field? Because that diversity is what's helping to buffer against the effects of pushing one way or another too far on the equilibrium, which is what
for one
puts us out of
population
whack.
taking over versus you know, and then rule, and then overwhelming other organisms in that ecosystem. Yeah, it's a kind of interesting way to look at one's body. That's what, you know, is the takeaway for me, is how it changes the notion of you know, our personal pronouns from I to we.
Right, which I mean, I mentioned that we are not mycelium. We are singular in that we are not plurality. We have distinct fingertips and a central brain and all these other things, but we are this living composition of other organisms. And when that composition gets thrown off for whatever reason, we suffer the health effects. And I think you see that in society with a number of like food allergies and inflammation issues, and even like development issues and some, you know, spectrum disorders and stuff like that. There's serious things that work with our gut health and how that relates to our ability to function in the world. And I think one of the things that I mentioned earlier, that the idea of prebiotics, but we are feeding ourselves as a living, breathing bioreactor full of organisms. And so like the type of foods you feed yourself really are determining some of that composition. And I think a lot of people, and this is a big factor in American nutrition, are just missing fiber. There's a huge fiber gap in the amount of polysaccharides and diversity that people are getting in their diets. And so like, I look at mushrooms as being, you know, if we could just cut the amount of meat we eat in half and add mushrooms in, I think immediately you'd see like rates of obesity, heart disease, all sorts of stuff just dropping off the chart, because we would suddenly have more fiber, especially in conjunction with meat, which is, I think, one of the things people eat meat because meat's delicious, but like there's no fiber in meat.
No, there's a lot of protein. But you know, it's true that mushrooms are prebiotics. So yeah, they're pure. They got a lot of fiber in them, so they're fantastic for. You know, the bottom line is that if, you know, for a really healthy diet, healthy gut microbiome, eat more mushrooms. You know, there's no harm in that, and it doesn't have to be just wild mushrooms or exotic mushrooms. You know, the Agaricus bisporus are great mushrooms. You know, when I first got into mushrooms, I used to be kind of a snob about the cultivated varieties, like the white buttons and so on. But I have learned, also as a part of working on this fantastic fungi cookbook, that there's no, that it's not the mushroom, it's the cook.
Yes.
You know, so I've learned not to be full of myself about the cultivated varieties. They are fantastic if you know what you're doing as a
they're
cook.
consistent. I mean, and the one thing is you do want to cook them, because I think a lot of people are used to eating mushrooms on like a salad bar as a raw thing, and like I think there is some emerging evidence that says maybe eating raw agarics may not be the best thing for you. I don't think it's going to cause cancer from one bowl of mushrooms, but like maybe as a regular thing, just make sure you cook your mushrooms, which is a pretty reasonable thing to tell people to do. And it develops more umami as well, which is, you know, as a chef, like you said, if you take mushrooms and just boil them in a pot of water and serve them to people, it's not going to taste great. But if you sit there and you slowly caramelize them and you add some other, you know, butter and thyme and garlic and these other components, you're like, wow, this has generated something that is so delicious. I could eat this literally every day, and it would probably be great for you to do that.
So one of the things I learned about cooking mushrooms as a result, I mean, I've been cooking mushrooms a long time, but I've had to test hundreds of recipes for the Fantastic Fungi Cookbook. And so that's really been a learning curve. And I've talked to lots and lots of knowledgeable people and chefs and, you know, and all that. So one of the things that I've learned is that mushrooms, they really don't behave the same way as vegetables. So for example, if you boil a potato for 40 minutes, it's going to disintegrate, right? But if you boil a mushroom for 40 minutes, it's going to retain its integrity for much the same reason that it's a prebiotic. You know, it's got those tough chitinase cell walls or chitin-based cell walls. So the notion of, and likewise, I learned that you don't have to use fat at all to cook mushrooms. In fact, you can just use fat to flavor them after cooking them for a while. And there's this YouTube that's been out. I think the guy's name is Jed. Anyway, what he shows is that you can just pan braise, which is like boiling the mushrooms in a low, not completely covered with water. Maybe you add some bay or whatever, but that you pan braise those mushrooms, and then when the water cooks out, the mushrooms are cooked. Then you can add your fat, and that will add flavor and prepare that mushroom for its next step. So that was a revelation to me too. Most mushroom recipes that you encounter, that I've encountered on like the web or whatever, have sautéing in fat stage first.
I mean, that's the Julia Child approach, right? I remember seeing, I was watching some old Julia Child stuff, and she's like, "Don't crowd the pan with mushrooms," and I was like, "No, that's terrible advice. Do crowd the pan, just don't add fat." That's you have to put them in there and cook all that liquid out, and sometimes you can put in like a quarter inch of water to kind of get them going. Once they start sticking the pan, then you add your fat, then you develop that really beautiful slow umami character. But I mean, just shifting the way we think about cooking mushrooms has a massive effect on their edibility.
I mean, they're different in in mycology, we don't call the mushroom stem a stem, right? Because it's not actually a stem, because it's not a plant. It's a stipe. And the cap is not actually called a cap, it's called a pileus. And well, the same thing goes for when you're browning mushrooms. So plants can be caramelized, where the carbs and the sugars interact with heat and cause that wonderful brown flavoring.
Maillard reactions.
Maillard happens to mushrooms, because the Maillard reaction is when the amino acids, which is part of that sort of rich protein aspect of mushrooms, when the amino acids and then a sugar brown. It's called the Maillard reaction. So it's this weird thing where I'm like working on this book, and a lot of authors are writing caramelization. I know exactly what they mean, but I'm thinking, do we go down that? No. So we're using Maillard reaction in an attempt to get people. I mean, I'm not saying stem and pileus, because that would be maybe pushing it too far.
Right. It alienates a little bit. You're trying to bring people in instead of pushing them away with the terms you use.
But we also want to get people, not to get people, but we want to encourage people to see mushrooms as a significantly different type of food than vegetables,
right?
Or meat. But
it's an in between. I mean, it has similarities to a vegetable, and yet it has protein and the satisfying unctuousness of a meat product. And I mean,
it cooks similarly too. I mean, it can take the heat of a meat.
It can take it.
And also I've noticed, like, even a delicate little enoki mushroom. I have a fabulous recipe from a woman, I think from Canada, and it's an enoki miso tofu soup, right? It's a Japanese style soup. Very elegant, very delicious. But enoki, they're like little nails. They're very small little mushrooms. So I made the soup. It was great, really simple. And then the next day I had some left over, and I had a few clams, and so I threw those clams in and cooked the whole thing again. I thought for sure those enoki aren't going to make it, right? They're just going to be like noodles or something at the end. No, they held their integrity perfectly. It was just amazing to me, and a real lesson at the durability of a mushroom to survive multiple heatings, like a whole lot of heat. They can take a heating, and it won't cause a beating.
Yes. Even what I usually do with mushrooms, I'll bring them home just to process them immediately. Some mushrooms I'll boil immediately and just throw them in the fridge, or I'll do that dry saute, a little bit of neutral oil and just salt, and I do nothing to them and just put them in a container. Then later when I go to cook, I know that they're already pre-cooked, and I can add them to dishes and toss them with the sauces and all the other stuff. But that way, the mushrooms will hold up texture-wise for quite a long time. And the other thing I've thought about recently that at some point we need to sit down and do some cooking together is mushroom butchery. Because this is something, if you were to tell a person like, hey, take this pig and cut it up however which way, they go, no, that's insane. You have to cut up a pig based on the musculature and all the tendons and all this other stuff. And yet with mushrooms, all we ever do is usually just run a knife through them. And at most, people recognize that the stem or the stipe and the cap have different textures and occasionally different flavors. But
Definitely when it comes to shiitake. I mean, those stems are hard as hell to chew. Yeah.
Right. And so you can really improve a mushroom by thinking about how you cut it up. And that's, this, I know it's the thing that chefs do because they think about every bite, what is the experience for the diner. But a lot of cooks at home just kind of like whack through things, and getting people to think a little bit more about how to use different parts of a mushroom, what might be appropriate for one cooking method versus another cooking method, how to really develop those flavors and maximize those textures. And with Chicken of the Woods, that's one that I used to always cut across. And then I realized that if I cut on the shelf, if I cut sort of horizontally across it, I'd get more of the striations between the rings of growth. And that would feel more like slippery muscle texture in your mouth when you do sort of a cutlet of it. And just little things like that I've been discovering as I go along. It's so interesting. And so I love to
each
talk
one
to food
is
people.
Different, really. I mean, it's amazing, and they have different pairings that make sense for them. Like, I've noticed that the best recipes are some excellent recipes that I've seen have had chanterelles mixed with apricots, for example, and
maximizing that fruity character and stuff.
Hericium mixed with fish in a recipe, and then for sure some mushrooms are benefit from a sort of duxelle approach, and others want to see a bigger, like a porcini, can you can do a slab of it and it's fine. All these tough stems and things make wonderful stock, and often those parts of the mushroom that I might not be using in a dish because they would take quite a bit longer to cook, or I could cook them if I could cut them very, very thin. I will make a very quick stock, and mushroom stocks are wonderful, and they produce quickly, much quicker than say a chicken stock.
Yep.
They get that nice rich color and flavor. The only downside is if you're a home canner, which I am, there's not any USDA data on pressure canning mushroom stock. So you kind of have to wing it. And it's not something that I can publish without being worried about, having a lawyer knock on my door. So it's a little bit of a tricky thing, when it comes to canning and preserving wild mushrooms. There just isn't the data, which really sucks, but it's understandable why, because, the wild mushrooms have incredible variability, and they vary even within species, depending on where they're growing. Back to this notion of terroir, and how important it is. Like, don't pick mushrooms on mining tailings. I mean, it really matters where they're coming from.
It does matter, and I think that's the thing that people forget sometimes in their rush and excitement about mushrooms. Is you're like, you may not want to eat this if it was on an urban lawn. You've gotten a lot of pesticide sprays and stuff like that. So it's tempering that enthusiasm occasionally, and just reminding people to be mindful of where their food's coming from.
There's a very famous story here in the New York area about a fellow. He's passed away now, but he collected morels for a very long time in a particular abandoned apple orchard in the New Jersey area. And he was collecting those morels every season for years. He eventually developed kidney disease, and he did some research along with some other people. I don't know if you ever talked to Eleanor Shavit. You should definitely have her on if you haven't. And she did a bunch of research determining that those apple trees in the 70s were treated with lead arsenate insecticide, which, it had been decades since the insecticide was used, the pesticide was used. However, the lead when leached into the soil, and the morel mycelium, which is an absorptive body, right? The morel mycelium absorbed the lead, and of course it can't break down lead. Lead's as small as it can be already, right? So the mycelium delivered that lead to the mushroom, and that's how this fellow developed lead poisoning and kidney disease. So it's really like where you pick your mushrooms is pretty important. And can affect all manner of things in terms of cooking and eating them.
Yeah, there's bioaccumulation issues there that are scary. And mushrooms end up collecting that because lead is going to be toxic to a mushroom as well. It's toxic to all living things, basically. And so the mycelium is saying, okay, this is a toxic byproduct, but mycelium can't go anywhere. They can't take a poop and then go somewhere else. They live in their food. So the way that they excrete waste products is to push all of those secondary metabolites and heavy metals and stuff into the fruiting bodies, which come up at the surface, and they're hoping, well, maybe an animal will get rid of this or something like that. There we come in. And so that's again why mushrooms have so much interesting secondary chemistry into those fruiting bodies, because they're just pushing all their metabolic waste products up. But along with that come the heavy metals.
Yeah, it's mycelium poop. I mean, I remember the first time I heard Tom Volk say that mushrooms are like the toilets of the fungus.
It's
like, oh my God, Tom, you must. But so what? So what?
We eat grosser things on a regular basis. It's it's closing that loop, right, between death, life, and
pooping.
And then pooping. Yeah, they're all related. You can't have one without the other. So we gotta just be at peace with all of them. And again, like we talked about, I think opening your eyes, the world of fungus, of bacteria, of there's a hidden cryptic world that's around us. It's not really that hidden. It's there for all of us if you look for it or if you understand it, because it's in your everyday life all the time. You can't spray your house with sanitizer and alcohol and wipe it all down and get rid of it. You're just scorching the earth and leaving room for things that might be out of whack, out of balance.
Oh, exactly.
So.
Yeah. I mean, until this virus hit, I was like, I get in the subway, I grab that subway pole. I was like, go ahead. I've got a good microbiome. I'm not scared. And all of that was working really well for me. I come home, I wash my hands, but no big deal. In this day and age, it's hard to be a champion for a complex, for embracing the microbes in your world. And I understand that the timing might not be ideal, but certainly in the larger, from the larger perspective, the more, I guess, we embrace the microbial world, the more we know ourselves.
Yeah. Well, I think there's something to be said too for, maybe not COVID specifically, but generally if you have healthy bacteria around, if you have something unhealthy drift in, there's going to be something there to help outcompete it or potentially, prevent its spread than if it's just that bare earth kind of things. And that's just basic ecology. And that's worldwide.
The virus bacteria relationship is pretty amazing, right? And a lot of good new stuff is coming out. So I don't know if you saw this report, but there was a small study that came out of Germany, I believe. And so that people who have a C. diff, which is an overgrowth of Clostridium bacteria in their guts, and makes folks really, really sick.
And Clostridium is the same thing they use to make botulin, or that's botulism poisoning, but it's the same thing for wrinkles. Botox. So anyway, but inside your body, it's really bad for you.
Yeah. You don't want it to paralyze your liver. Yeah. So anyway, to treat, one of the few treatments for an infection of this sort is to have a fecal transplant, which is, not many doctors will do it because they're like, what? We don't really know how it's working, why it's working.
Yeah, they still don't really understand why.
It's very curious, right? So these German scientists did a study where they filtered fecal matter that was going to be used in a fecal transplant to help some folks who were suffering from C. diff. They filtered the fecal material of all bacteria. So the only thing that was left was secondary metabolites, these bits and pieces, and viruses, which are so small they got through the filter, and they inoculated the patients with that, and the patients got well. So their conclusion was that it's not maybe it's not the introduction of healthy bacteria that displace the pathogenic Clostridium population, but actually viruses that are the antagonists.
The phages, the little, phages of viruses affects bacteria. And
so, just, Okay, so that's pretty cool.
That is super. Yeah, I mean that's in my world I did similar things with conditioned media where I would grow bacteria in media and then strain the bacteria out and then put the yeast in and then look to see how those secondary metabolites were affecting yeast physiology down the road kind of thing.
Yeah.
Maybe there was some phages in there. I don't know. I've been asked several times like, hey, what about yeast phages? And I many times I've been like, it's not really an issue in brewing and winemaking, but I know, out in the world there's probably a lot of interaction between the single cell, yeast fungi and bacteria and agonists of phages and all sorts of stuff. So, but again, the world is vast and complex and we can't cover all of that. And I'm just really thankful for you taking the time to hop on here and nerd out with me. It's been really fun. Do you have any,
Super fun.
I know that you have this fantastic fungi cookbook that's coming up and people should definitely pay attention to that. And you've got Microbia that came out pretty recently and all of your other amazing cookbooks and Mycophilia. Do you have any other projects that you want to bring attention to or causes you want to tell me about before we sign off here?
Well, I do. Oh, I just participated in this a television show for children.
Which I watched last night. It was so cool.
Isn't it sweet?
Yeah, Waffles and Mochi. This is Michelle Obama's cooking and food education
I did not
show.
get to meet Michelle Obama. All right, just let me make that very clear. It would have been great, but no.
If Michelle's listening, talk to Eugenia.
Yeah, really. Hi.
Let's do dinner.
Yeah, really. But the show is wonderful for your listeners who have small children. It's sort of like Sesame Street meets the Food Channel.
Yeah,
it's using puppets and then all kinds of guests and to talk about particular foods, not only their nutritional value but their flavors and things that might appeal to children about them, quirks about the plants, and in the case of the mushroom episode, quirks about the fungus. So. It's called Waffles and Mochi, and it's super, super sweet and really kind of well-intentioned. I love the fact that Michelle Obama was into this kids' health and diet issues when she was First Lady, and she's still working on that stuff. Good for her. She's sincere.
Yeah, she's trying to close that fiber gap and make people not afraid of vegetables and make kids realize that vegetables are delicious, and that's, I think that whole mushroom episode was great because it totally started with that idea of mycophobia. I have fear of this otherness. And then very slowly and very gently it introduces them. You're brought in as sort of the resident mycologist that his magic cart calls up and, visits a mushroom farm and eats mushrooms with kids. And it's, we watched a couple episodes last night and I was totally in love. It doesn't have to be just for kids. As an adult, I really enjoyed it. So.
Yeah, but it's a nice thing. And it's like, reminds me back in the day when we used to have PSAs. We would have more public service announcements and more public broadcasting for the benefit of the public. So it gives me a little bit of that vibe, and that's a good thing.
Absolutely, and I'm really happy that you got to be the voice of mycology in that, and being part of the face of current American mycoculture. You are author Eugenia Bone, who has, you're collecting this amazing community of recipes and all these other things. So I'm so thankful that you took the time to talk to me and are out there doing what you do. So
Gordon,
keep it up.
I love you,
I look forward to it.
You're the best. Thank you. It's really nice being, chatting away this afternoon with you.
Absolutely.
Take care.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.